Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today on Connect Call Flow Best Practices. This webinar is going to go over some of the basics of your typical call flow scenarios and what you'll see typically in most environments. We are going to focus on hunt groups, work groups, and auto attendants today. And this will be part of a series that we are going to be putting together over the next few months that will build on what we do today and provide a complete overview of the call flow in the Connect environment and how to configure it to best suit your needs. My name is Tom Lance. I am a senior support engineer over at Inflow Communications and the subject matter expert over here. I have 5 years of telecommunications experience working with the Mitel platforms as well as the cloud offerings that we do here at Inflow. And I will be taking you through this webinar today. A little bit about Inflow Communications before we get started. Inflow has a sole focus on unified communications and contact center solutions. Voice is what we do. We don't jump into anything else like direct networking or anything like that. We are specialized in voice environments. We are a ShoreTel or Mitel Platinum partner, RingCentral and Genesys Pure Cloud support as well. We work with them directly as partners. We have offices and employees in 10 states around the country now, and we currently support over 180,000 endpoints and over 800 customers nationwide. And we are maniacal about the customer experience, which is why if you give us a call, we have a 3-ring policy. You will not be waiting on hold, and we will get back to you very, very quickly. Everybody here is very well versed in the environments that we support, so you can rest assured that anybody you talk to will be an expert in the field. Here is a small snippet of some of the customers that we support. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started here. So you should see my screen now, which is the splash page for the Connect Director platform. If you are currently running this in your environment, you're probably very familiar with the dashboards shown here. And what we are going to do is go over the basics of hunt groups, work groups, and auto attendants, how they interact with each other, and also do a sample of how to kind of connect those together so you can see the foundation to actually build that call flow out. First thing I want to do is go over a couple of differences between work groups and hunt groups. I'm sure that most people in here as system administrators have probably heard those terms before if you do have a Mitel environment that you work in now. They are very similar, but they are not the same. And so I wanted to highlight some of those differences to make sure that people are on the same page with what would work best for your particular environment. The first and foremost thing that is different between the two is the work groups, which is a software-based group that you can put people into to take calls and work as a group in the system, resides on the server platform. So this is going to reside on your ShoreTel headquarters server, or if you have any distributed voice servers in your environment, they would live there as well. The hunt groups, which are a little bit more basic version of a group that you can set up in the ShoreTel system, they reside on your switches. And so because of that, you can use the hunt groups typically for smaller remote locations that have switches on site. You can put those hunt groups directly in that site without the need for another server. So sometimes this can be a better way to do things. Because of those differences, there are some limitations with hunt groups versus the work groups. Namely, hunt groups do not provide their own voicemail. And they also are a little bit more limited because they have to run off the switch hardware. So they do have some limitations that work groups do not. Such as the amount of hunt groups you can put on one switch, whereas a server can support several more work groups just because of the processing power. Otherwise, they're very similar. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go over the minute differences between those two, how to set them up, and also how to link them together. And at the end, I'm also going to show auto attendants and how you can actually set up your call flow so that you have an auto attendant with options to go to these hunt and work groups as needed. This is what the call flow in the ShoreTel environment is for the majority of customers. As we go through, there will be a questions box that you can submit questions to. At the end of this, I will go through those questions and provide answers. So feel free to throw out some questions as they come up, and I will make sure they get answered for you. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through the hunt groups. which is going to be in your Connect director. To get there, you would click on the wrench, which is the administration tab. Then we're going to click on features, call control, and then finally, I'm going to click on hunt groups. This is going to bring up two panes on the screen, and you'll see that we do have a number of hunt groups in our system as well. I'm going to use this one down here, this Tom test hunt group, as my example. At the top is going to be all of the hunt groups in your system, and at the bottom will be the configuration of the hunt group that you have selected. Going through this, you'll see that it's a pretty simple setup to get a hunt group set up in the system. And I'll go ahead and I'm going to expand this to make this a little bit easier to see everything here. Going through all of the different options in the hunt group, we have our name and extension, just like we would for any users that we're going to build. Under that, we also have a backup extension. What this backup extension is for is a fail-safe, just in case there's anything going on with the hunt group or the work group, because the work group also has this option. That will allow you to make sure calls get somewhere if there's an issue with the group and it can't pick up the call. In this case, you can see that my extension is set up as the backup, meaning if there was a problem with the hunt group, the calls would still forward, but they would come directly to my extension rather than to the hunt group to make sure that they are able to be answered. Under that, just like your users, you also have the ability to assign a DID to the group. So if you want a direct number to call the group, you can do so. Mine does not have one, but just to flesh this out here under the DID settings, if you click on the show details here, it will show the ability to actually enable a DID and choose a range and number. And then under that are all the different settings for the group and what you can do to configure how calls flow to it. So you do have a couple boxes. If you want an internal group that you don't want people to call internally, you can make this extension private, which will remove it from the system directory and make it non-searchable. You can also uncheck this include in system dial by name directory box. This is for any auto attendants that have a dial by name directory set up so that you can find somebody within the system. If you uncheck this box, then this group will not show up in that either. By default, this box is checked, and by default, the extension is not private. So that is good information to have if you do want to make those changes. Here, you can also change the switch that the hunt group actually resides on. And this is important for anything like a remote site hunt group. That is where we typically do see hunt groups in use is for smaller offices, maybe 10 to 15 people where they don't have the server on site. They do have a physical switch. And this would allow you to actually place the hunt group local to that group, which is good for connectivity because then you don't have to worry about moving all that traffic across a WAN link from the group and the switch that's assigned to the hunt group to the users in question. And also, if the site has its own dial tone, it keeps everything local as well, which would allow you to somewhat operate on an island if there was an issue with network connectivity back to the main site. It's as simple as clicking this drop down to change the switch. In our environment here, we only have the one virtual switch, so I have nothing that I can change this one to. But what you would do as a best practice is you would set this up and put this on the switch that is local to the site that you want the hunt group to operate at. You also have your call stack depth. It defaults to 8, as you can see here. This is how many concurrent calls the hunt group can handle at one time, all ringing at the same time, before it decides it is too busy to handle more calls. So in this case, this is not 8 agents on the phone. This is 8 calls at the same time hitting the hunt group before they can pick up the call. Typically, you don't need any more than 3 or 4. 8 is a little bit overkill, and it does take up some more system resources. So this can be lowered depending on your call volume and your needs. And then under that, you'll see we have options for how to actually send these calls to users. The distribution pattern is going to be how the calls are actually handled. And you'll see that we have 2 options. We have the option for top-down. We also have an option for simultaneous. Top-down is going to be based on the user list that you put in place for the hunt group itself. And it is going to go from the first user down the list until somebody picks up the call. And on the next call, it will start at the top of the list and work its way down again. So if you have 4 people in, it will ring user 1, then 2, then 3, and so forth. until somebody picks up. Second call, user 1 is the first person that gets rang again. And then simultaneous is pretty self-explanatory. All the phones ring at the same time. It is important to note, and this is actually for hunt groups and work groups as well, there is a maximum user account of 16 for simultaneous ring. That is to make sure that the switches don't get overloaded with the simultaneous calls. And it will tell you if you try to add more than 16 agents to a group that is set for simultaneous ring, it just won't let you do it. So that is an important piece of that as well. Then under that, you have your rings per member and a no answer number of rings. You'll see that currently mine are both set to 6. And what this does is it tells you the number of rings that the group is going to try a user before it will roll to the next user. And then it also is going to tell you how many rings the group will try in total before it will go to the no answer destination, which we'll go over below. This is important if you have a group that's working as top down. As an example, if you had 4 users and you wanted them each to get 6 rings before the group would go to the no answer destination, but you also had the no answer number of rings set to 6, like we see in this situation, what would happen is the first user would get 6 rings, and then instead of any of the other users getting any of the ring back, it would go straight to the no answer destination. So we would want to adjust the no answer number of rings. And you can see here, you can do that for anywhere between 1 ring and 255 rings, which is a very, very long amount of time. We typically set this between 4 and 6 rings, depending on the needs of the group. We do also have 2 checkboxes under that, and these are unique to hunt groups. The first one, call member when forwarding all calls. This is used for groups that have users that utilize external assignment, which is a way of sending all the calls that they get to their extension to another phone, like their cell phone or a landline at their home or something like that for working remote. By default, if this box is not checked and a user is set up for external assignment, they are not going to get the call. They wouldn't be able to receive those calls. If you need users that are remote from the site and using those kind of settings to get those calls, you will check. If you check that box, then the system will utilize your trunks to actually make a call outbound to those users when calls come into the group, just like if they were getting a direct extension call. So that's a way to bypass that problem if you have people working away from the office. And then the other option, skip member if already on a call. This is for anybody for any group that needs to be in place, but you don't want them to get multiple calls from the same group while they're already on a call. The default behavior for hunt groups, which is different from work groups, is that they will ring the phones of all the users, regardless of if they're on the phone or not, if another call comes in. Checking this box will skip users that are already on a phone call, whether it's a group call, an internal call, or an external call of another variety. And so they won't get the call if that box is checked. By default, it's unchecked, and that is typically how these are used. But you can do that. The other option there is you can set up a work group if you want people not to get those calls, because work groups by design will not actually send a call to an agent that's already on a call. It's just how they work. And then under that, you have your call forward destinations. So you have your call stack full. This is also known as the busy destination, and this is where calls would go if, in my example, we got a 9th call that was ringing at the same time and the hunt group decided it was busy. You can send this to anywhere you would like. In a lot of cases, this could be another overflow group, which is actually what I have set up in my scenario here. You can see that Tom test hunt group 2. This would be a nice overflow group. Maybe supervisors or people who don't necessarily take calls could work in that group and they could handle any overflow. And you'll see over on the side here, there's a little note here. If no destination is specified, a busy tone is played. So if you were to not put anything in this box, the 9th caller would just get a busy signal and they wouldn't be able to go anywhere. So that is important to note, and that's why it's always very important to make sure that we have an option in this box. And then we also have the no answer destination. That's pretty self-explanatory. If nobody's available to pick up the call and you hit your no answer number of rings, this is where the calls would end up, which in this case is set to the training work group that we have set up. And just like the call stack full, if no destination is specified, you'll see that there's a little note there that says calls will disconnect after 2 minutes. So if you have a no answer destination set up, the phone will just continue to ring, and it will continue to try to ring the agents that are in the group until you hit 2 minutes. When you hit 2 minutes, the call will just disconnect. So again, very important to have a spot to send these calls to if nobody is available. And this is a good way to set up hunt groups to go to a work group. As I noted before, hunt groups do not have their own voicemail box. Work groups do. And so a common practice for smaller sites would be to set up a hunt group local to the site with agents set up that are local to the site so that they can get the calls. And then you would set that no answer destination to a work group that's set to always go to voicemail with those same people in it. That way you can still get voicemail, you still have a local setup for that remote site, and you still have the ability to take those voicemails and still have the ability to get those to the right group members. So this is a good way to do that. And then you also have an off hours and holiday destination. You can see it's also the training work group here. Again, typically this would be an auto attendant or a work group voicemail that you would go to for after hours. And this does get set up by any on-hour schedules that you have applied to the system, which is under this, and holiday schedules. If you are used to using custom schedules, it is important to note as well, hunt groups do not accept custom schedules. They only do an on and off hour schedule and a holiday schedule. So if you have something specific that needs to be changed, it's usually easiest to either adjust the holiday schedule, depending on what you need to do, or change the on-hours schedule just so that the system knows where to go. And there's also a way to make your hunt group busy, which I'll go over at the end here, which can do the same thing. And that's the general settings tab. And that's the majority of hunt groups right there in a nutshell. The other piece of it, and you'll see up here, we do have the 3 tabs. We have general, members, and DNS. I'm going to go to members now. And you'll see right now, there is 2 panes down at the bottom. On the left side are the available extensions in the system. And on the right side are the selected extensions. The selected extensions are the extensions that are in the hunt group currently. So as you can see, there is an extension 1082 Tom Cell External assigned that is currently in this group. It is the only agent currently. If I wanted to add Mark Cell to this, I could click on Mark Cell on the left side and click this right arrow, and I'll bring Mark over. I'll take Mark out though. If I wanted to take a whole bunch of users, you can do a shift click to select. So if I wanted from 1001 to 1006, for example, I could hold shift and click that and move them over. And you can see that all of those are in there now. And I can do the same to bring them back as well. And if you click this little magnifying glass, you can search by an extension number or by a name. So if I wanted to add Mitchell test to this particular group and I search for Mitch, you'll see it popped up here. I can put that extension in here easily enough as well. So it's fairly easy to actually find and assign the members. And unlike a work group, which we'll get into in a minute here, any member of a hunt group is just a member of the hunt group. There's no logging in or logging out. If you're in a hunt group, you'll get the calls. That is how they work. And then finally, the last piece of the hunt group here is the DNS tab. You won't typically spend a lot of time in here because typically you'll use DID assignment to assign numbers to a group. But if you had multiple numbers that all needed to go to the same place, you could add those numbers here by clicking this add button, where it will ask you for the correct trunk group. In this case, we only have the 1. The digits that are going to come into the system, which is going to depend on the number of digits that your carrier sends you. And then you can also add a description. So if there was a specific, like a backline number that you were using, you could put backline in here. This is just a description tab. So you can add extra numbers here, and you can even change the music on hold for a specific number using the DNS tab as well. So if you had different markets that needed different branding, you could actually do it this way, where they would all reach the same groups, but you would be able to actually specify specific music on hold or specific branding for that region based on the number that comes in. So you do have all those options for the hunt group. And that's the hunt group in a nutshell. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to jump over to work groups to go over the differences there, and then go over some concepts of how you can tie these together to make your system more efficient and make sure you have everything you need in place to get that call flow working the way that you need it to work. So work groups are going to be in a similar spot in the system. So again, we're going to click on the wrench, then we're going to click on the features, and then instead of clicking on call control, work groups are actually their own option here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this here. And just like before, you'll see that we have two panes. We have a pane at the top where it is going to show all of the work groups that are currently in the system. And at the bottom is going to be the configuration for the work group and how you can actually set that up, very similar to the hunt group. I'm going to go ahead and grab the training work group that we were using here. It does take a moment to load. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and blow this up so you guys can see this again as well. And the first thing you're going to notice is there are a number of additional tabs under training work group compared to what you were seeing on the hunt group. That's because the work groups can handle a large amount of additions that the hunt groups don't do, because the hunt groups are basically just basic groups. You get ring back and then it goes to the agents you specify. Work groups can be used for things like call queuing, branding, and hold messaging to an extent. So you can set up a basic IVR using this method. Anything more advanced would be more of a contact center solution, but you do have basic functionality here. As I mentioned, you also do have voicemail boxes, and these do also have some more abilities for scheduling as well. So to go through this, just like before, we have our name, our extension, our backup extension. We also have those system dial by name directory and private extension boxes that we can use just like the hunt group. So if we had this group and we didn't want it to be called internally, you would just click the make extension private button and it would no longer show up in the system directory, so people wouldn't be able to just find it. And just like before as well, we can also assign a DID from the DID settings tab. So this is all very, very similar to the hunt group itself. Under that, you'll see a few things that are a little bit different. The first thing that you see here is the user group, which I have currently set to voicemail notification. This user group setting is what determines the properties of the mailbox that you can use on the work group. So that will be something that we'll get into in a different webinar down the road in terms of configuring user group settings. But you can specify how many voicemails can be left in a particular box, how long they're kept, any auto pruning, and outgoing and ingoing maximum duration in seconds for messages. So you can actually specify all that for the work group, and that's all defined by the user group, which we're currently using voicemail notification for. Under that is also a server option. This is going to work very similar to the switches drop-down menu that I showed you for the hunt groups. The difference is that this is going to reside on a server itself and not on the switch. So when a call comes in to a work group, it does actually send the audio feed to the server to distribute to the agents before an agent picks up the call. So that's important to note. So while you can set up a work group at the headquarters site for the remote sites, what you want to make sure you keep in mind is if you do that, that communication to those phones is going to have to go across your network to the remote sites, and then at that point, once an agent picks up, then you would be able to you would see a reduction in that bandwidth that's being used. But if you're doing like a simultaneous ring to many users across a WAN link, you could run into situations where you could have an issue, or if you're having an issue with network connectivity of any kind, you could see issues where calls are not going to agents. So that is important to note. And in those situations, that's where hunt groups can come in very handy. If I wanted to change the server, I just click on this drop down here. You'll see I've got a couple here to choose from. I'm going to keep it on the headquarters soft switch for now. So if you do have a local server to the site, then it is a best practice to put the work group on the server that's local to the site, just to minimize any bandwidth that's being used across the network. We also have a language tab. This is for prompting on the work group itself for voicemail. For the vast majority of you, you'll never see anything in here other than English, but if you do have another language installed, you can change it here. And then you also have the checkbox to enable a mailbox. This is really the main function of a work group that makes it very, very nice to have, especially in conjunction with hunt groups. You can uncheck this if you don't want a mailbox at all. It is on by default. And then you can also change the mailbox server. So if you have multiple servers in your environment that you're using for voicemail, you can actually move the work group voicemail to the server of your choosing to make sure you're using the right storage and it's at the right facility. By default, it's going to go to your headquarters server. And you could use any DVS in your system that is not being used for a contact center solution or advanced application like call recording for these voicemail boxes. And then you also have a work group name. This works very similar to the recorded name for your users. It's kind of a default thing that the system will use until you actually record a greeting. So what would happen is if I called this work group and I got to voicemail and there was no proper greeting recorded, it would say you've reached, and then whatever the recorded name for the work group is, and then it would ask you to leave a message. This will be replaced once you add a greeting, though. And then there's a couple other options down at the bottom. Enable automatic agent logout on ring no answer. That is one that people do like to try and use, and usually it causes more harm than good. This is because in a workgroup environment, you do have to log in order to receive calls. And it's also a license-based function, meaning that unless you have a workgroup agent or higher license for your users, they are not able to log themselves in and out. It's up to the administrator to do it, or a workgroup supervisor or operator who can log other people in and out, depending on the groups that they're a part of. What will happen with this is if somebody is part of a work group and this box is checked, when they get a call, if they don't take that call and it rolls to the next agent, they'll get automatically logged out from the system. And if they don't have that license, they won't be able to log themselves back in. So that's important to note. If you have a workgroup operator or a workgroup supervisor or an operator rather, you would be able to log the agents in using the client with those people. And if your users have workgroup agent licenses, they can log themselves in and out. Otherwise, you have to do it. So then to go to the routing tab, which is going to be probably the most important for everybody, you'll notice that we get 4 different tabs. We have an on hours, an off hours, a holiday, and a custom menu. We can set these on a specific schedule. So if we need to, for example, put this training work group on an 8 to 5 Pacific schedule, I can set that schedule here. And so between those hours is when the on hours routing would work. Outside those hours would be when off hours would work. And you'll see this looks very similar to the hunt group. There's a few differences. There's a couple differences in the distribution pattern. The server is able to keep a tab on who's been on a call and who's been idle. So you do have a longest idle option. So whoever hasn't been on a call the longest will essentially get the call first if you do that, and it will continue to check that as the day goes on. This does get affected by other calls. So if you have agents that are doing internal calls or external calls outbound, they do get put to the back of the line. So that is important to note. You also have a round robin option, which is going to work very similar to top down, except it actually does kind of keep in order. So it will start top down, work on the first agent and work their way down. On the next call, though, instead of starting at agent 1, it will start at agent 2, and then at agent 3, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, those are functionally the same as a hunt group. Call forwarding, you can set it to be no answer or busy. So that'll be after the number of rings is hit, it'll have a no answer destination or a busy destination. You can also set this to always, which is what you would typically set up for a voicemail only work group. So if you were going to set this up so that a hunt group is going to forward to this just to take messages, you would typically set this to call forward always. Or if you have specific hours, so in my scenario, before 8 or after 5 Pacific, then you would be able to just use the off hours for that as well. And then under this, you can see the areas that the system is going to actually send those calls to. You'll notice that always is grayed out. That's because we're set to no answer or busy. So the always destination is actually not factored in for this particular call forwarding scenario. But if the system is busy, or if there's no answer, and in this case, busy means all the agents are either on a phone call or unavailable, and no answer is there were agents available, but they just didn't pick up the call. You can see they both go to voicemail. And that is the generic voicemail extension for the server. But where this will end up is the voicemail box of the work group itself. So it will be specific to this work group. And just under that, you can see that forward after as well as the rings per agent. That works just like it does on the hunt group. And then you also have a logged out option. So this is where calls will go if somebody places a call, it reaches the work group, but none of the agents that are a part of the work group are logged into the system currently. You can specify a different spot for that as well. So a good best practice for that would either be a voicemail box so that you can at least call the people back if you're having an issue with being able to get logged in, or a backup hunt group could be used for this as well. So a best practice for this would be setting up a hunt group with the same members as the work group you wanna set up. And then when somebody makes a call and everybody's logged out, instead of just going to voicemail or into the ether, it will go to that backup group where everybody's a part of as well. And remember, you don't need to be logged into those. If you're a part of those groups, you just get the calls. And so it will at least provide basic functionality. And then under here, this is the work group greeting. So you can see we have play grayed out right now. We don't actually have a greeting on this one for the purpose of this training, but this is where you would be able to set up the greeting for the work group for this particular call handling mode. So this would be for on hours. You could record directly from here, and if you wanted to, you can set up the system to call your extension, or if you have a PC headset hooked up and you're accessing it from your computer, you can just do it that way. You can also import a file. If you wanted to import a file, what you would want to do is make sure that the file that you have is in WAV format, and it needs to be an 8 kilobit, 8 kilohertz mono ULAW format. If you have any questions on that specifically, we do actually have the ability to convert files to what needs to be on the system. So if you have something that you want to use, we can help you with that. The other way you can do it is if you are familiar with the Connect client, you can actually leave yourself a message. So you could basically record your greeting into your own mailbox, and then you can right-click that voicemail that you leave yourself and download it as a WAV file. And that will automatically create the file in a format that the system can use. So that's a nice quick shortcut if you need to create a quick and dirty greeting. Otherwise, if you wanted to get something professionally recorded, we can either convert it for you, or if you go through us, we do have a partnership with a company that does that, Woodstock Media. We would be able to get you the correct file as well. And these are going to be the exact same for the on hours, the off hours, the holiday, and the custom. So to show you here, if I go to off hours, you'll see it's exactly the same. The difference is now the call forward is set to always, and it's set to always go to voicemail. That is the default for the other options. You can change those if you need. So if I wanted to change to no answer or busy and allow calls, for example, I can do that if I want to. I can also do this for the holidays. So you can see that here, and also for the custom tab. So you have all of those options. Going to the voicemail tab, this one's pretty quick. You have the ability to change your voicemail password. The default for your work groups is going to be 1234. And this is going to allow you to actually dial into the system, dial to that mailbox using the voicemail login, and access your voicemails, as well as change the greeting using those prompts if you want. And you can change the password for every work group on the work group by going to the mailbox tab and just changing the password here. And then you have a couple other options as well. For system distribution lists, by default, the work groups will accept broadcast messages. If you don't want to allow company-wide broadcast to go to the work group, you can disable this box. You can also set up the work group so that you can deliver the voicemails to your agents that are part of the work group through email, and you can set it up for either an email notification saying that you have a voicemail, or you can even send the entire voicemail through email as a wave notification as well. If I choose to do one of these two, I'll just click on wave file. You'll see that email address comes back here. You do only get to put one email address in here, so best practice would be to set up a distribution email for the users that need to get the voicemail. And then automatic message forwarding works just like a user. If you want to automatically forward voicemails from the work group that it gets to another location, you can specify a specific mailbox, which would be a user. And you can also delete the message from the work group mailbox after forwarding if you so choose as well. So you do have those options. And then the other couple tabs here, the members tab is going to look exactly the same as the hunt group tab. There is one big difference though. So if I click on Tom Lyons, for example, you notice there's a little piece on the side that wasn't there on the hunt group. Select agent state. And by default, when you add a user to the group, they'll be logged out. So remember when I said that you need a workgroup agent or higher license in order to log yourself in or out. If you want to set up work groups where people can get calls, but you don't have the licensing capability, you can log people in using the agent state here. So if I click on logged in and I hit save at the top, then it would keep my user logged in here. This is where you can manipulate settings on the back end. Otherwise, if they have workgroup agent licensing, they can log themselves in and out, and a workgroup supervisor or an operator can log other people in and out as well. So you do have those options. And then I'm also going to briefly go over queue handling. This is what I was talking about with the limited IVR options. This will be a part of what we go over in next month's webinar training. But essentially what this is a spot where you can set up hold music and periodic prompting for people that call into your system and allow them to do things like press 1 to go to voicemail if they don't want to wait. It is somewhat limited, so depending on your needs, it may work for what you need. You may want to look into a contact center solution as well if you need some more advanced IVR tools and want some more advanced scripting features. But we do have the option to do that through the work groups as well. So now that we've gone over the hunt groups and the work groups, a couple scenarios where these would work well together. These are typically used in conjunction with one another in order to provide a little bit of redundancy, which I kind of touched on a little bit, but a good example would be a work group that's set up as the primary contact point. So there would be a work group that people would typically call into, and you would have the same people that are in the work group in a hunt group that would be set up as the backup destination for the work group. And so what that sets you up for is if there's any particular issue, like let's say your server goes down, which is definitely not good, obviously, but your server goes down and the work group can't function and your agents can't log into the group. When those calls come in and the extension can't be reached for the work group, the backup destination will get triggered, which will be the hunt group. The hunt group resides on a switch and not the server. So it's not experiencing the same problems as the work group server would be. And if it has the same members, then well, you wouldn't have any advanced things like your branding or your or any queue handling, and you wouldn't have voicemail from that. You would still have calls presented to your agents, so your agents would still be able to get those calls. So this is a great way to do that. And then the other way to do it, which is fairly common, especially if you have many sites, would be hunt groups at the local sites. And I'll go back to the hunt group to show this here. This will just take a second. There we go. Hunt groups at a local site. And then if you needed a voicemail, which you just didn't have the capability for at the local site in regards to a server or a voicemail switch, you would be able to actually set up one of those work groups, set it to always forward, and then you would set that as the no answer destination or the off hours and holiday destination, or both, depending on what you need in your system. And that way the hunt group would get rang first in this scenario. And then if nobody in the hunt group picks up, then you would be able to send it to the work group. And you could even set this as the backup destination if you want, to kind of provide that same functionality. So if the switch goes down, or the hunt group is not working, and you're just running into an issue of some sort there, then in that scenario, call would come in, hunt group would not be able to pick up the call, and the call would instead go to your work group voicemail. And while you wouldn't be able to handle the call live, you would be able to get that voicemail, call the customer back, and work with them. So that way you wouldn't miss any calls. So that's a typical way to set these up together as a basic function. And then finally, we can tie these together to make it nice and easy for people to get to where they need to go using auto attendants. I'm sure most of you in here are pretty familiar with auto attendants, and in order to get to them, you would click on the wrench, so administration, click on features, and then click on auto attendant. These are going to be your call trees. So your press 1 to go to support, press 2 to go to sales. This is where you set that up. And to go over this briefly here, because we'll get into some more advanced stuff with auto attendants next month as well. I'm going to go ahead and just click on the support main AA to show this guy here. You get a few different tabs. The first stuff you see in general is going to be basically exactly the same as the work group and hunt group. Your name extension, you can choose the language, which is almost always going to be English. You can change the DID here. And then the one other option that isn't on those groups is the maximum time to enter multiple digits. That is used for any auto attendant that has the ability to dial extensions by just typing in the extension. And that's how long the system's going to wait for multiple digits to be entered. So if I called in and I pressed 3, by default it's going to wait 3,000 milliseconds to see if I press any other digits. If I don't, then it's just going to try and use option 3 on the auto attendant. If I dial a full extension, then it will try to go use the option for that. And then under here, just like before, you can make the extension private. You can allow the prompt recording using your telephone, meaning you can call into the voicemail system, dial into the auto attendant extension. You can change the prompt that way. This is nice for if you have inclement weather. By default, that's off, so that's a good note to have. My best practice would be to make sure that this is turned on for any auto attendant that might need an emergency messaging change, just so you have the ability to do it from here. And the menu password, just like the work group password, is always 1234 by default. You can change that in that box below. And then I'm going to skip DNS because that works the same for everything. But to go through the abilities on the menu here real quickly, you do have the ability to set up a schedule just like the work groups and hunt groups, where you can see this one is set from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific here. And then down below, and actually let me do this, there we go. These operation buttons is where you would be able to actually change the settings here. So you would be able to go in and, for example, if I wanted option 1 to go to an extension, I can click on the extension here, and then I can either type in the extension or I can type in a name, and it looks like my dropdown is not working right now, and that might be because of the version that we are using for the testing environment right now. But if I knew the exact extension, so for example, I know mine, and I wanted option 1 to go there, we could do that here. If I wanted to specify a group, it would work the same way. You just click on go to extension, and then you would put in the extension or start typing the name of the group you wanted to go to. And that is how you can tie things from an auto attendant to a group. So a general way that we would set up call flow for for a customer moving forward. What we typically see in general is that a site has a mainline number, not necessarily a number for every specific group that works out of the site, but you have a main number that will go to the auto attendant. And so the way that you would tier this is, for example, and I'm going to go and actually grab my hunt group extension here, 7206. Okay. If I wanted to change this test AA, for example, and make this auto attendant go to 7206, my hunt group, when I use option 4, I can just type it in here, on hours. And if I hit save, which I'm not going to at this point, but just to show you here, what would happen is when the auto attendant picks up the call, somebody selects option 4, it would go to that test hunt group. And then based on the redundancy that we talked about, I actually have a backup hunt group in place if there's an issue there or we get too many calls. And I also have voicemail set up, if you recall, in the off hours and holiday setup, as well as the backup destination. So I would be able to present those calls to the hunt group. If there's an issue with the hunt group or nobody's able to pick up the call, then it transitions to the work group. And that work group that we have set up for the training would be able to accept voicemail for the calls, so that we basically have all of our bases covered. So this is a good way to tie things together, and is going to be your typical way that you would see this put together for call flow for a system. So you can do numbers direct to a group. You can go through the auto attendant. You can also do both if you want in the system. So if I do this, and actually we'll hit save here for on hours, just to show you. So you'll see that this option is now option 4 for the hunt group here. If I click on off hours though, you'll see that those options are different because it's going to be a different option for each call handling mode that you have set up. So if I'm before 5 a.m. Pacific or after 5 p.m. Pacific, that option 4 wouldn't be here unless I specify it again. And where this comes into play is you can either send it to the same group, which could have a schedule applied to it as well. So if I, for example, had the same schedule applied to the hunt group, and the hunt group's off hours was to go to the work group for voicemail, then if I did the same thing and just did 7206 here and put this to the hunt group, the auto attendant would forward to the hunt group, which would then forward to the work group and collect voicemail immediately. So this will follow the schedules that are applied for the groups even after the auto attendant is hit. So everything is individually checked. So if you run into an issue, for example, where people are able to reach your auto attendant, people are able to hit options, but they're going straight to voicemail, make sure that the scheduling matches up. A lot of times what we will see is we'll see that the schedule for one item or the first item in line is different from the second. And so while the auto attendant might be in on hours mode for operation, the work group might not. And so instead of presenting calls are going directly to voicemail. So that is important to know. The other thing that you can do though, if you want to just go ahead and get those sent to the group by itself, is you can also set this up to just take a message. It won't let me go to my hunt group because I don't have a voicemail for that. But if I wanted to go to the training work group, which is that backup destination and also the work group that handles the voicemails for my group, I can just set up to take a message for that same button option as well. And that will just go straight to the voicemail without even trying to get to the hunt group. So you're bypassing any schedule settings there as well. So you can do it either way. Typically, what we would recommend as a best practice would be to use the take a message option, just because it removes any other variables from the equation and you're going direct to the source for stuff like this for off hours. And then as far as actually tying these things together, taking a look at your call flow, if you are a Inflow customer, one thing that we have is our analytics suite powered by Bright Metrics. And that can be used to create on-demand call flow reports. So it can be a nice way to see where your call flow is in the system, you can actually set up these reports for specific times of day, specific days, and also set them up so that you can see a specific number dialed in or start at a specific point, like a specific group or menu. So if you are curious about where these calls are landing, how they're routing at a specific time, you can use that tool to actually build a visual chart that the agent will make for you that you can also download as a PDF. And you can see how it works. And then if you go ahead and make changes to it, then you can run it again. You can compare and contrast and make sure the changes that you want are the changes that were actually made, and also give you a baseline point so that if you do have to go back and revert your changes, or if you need to go back to the drawing board for any reason, you have a copy of your call flow right in your hands that you can easily go back to. And that will be something that we will show in another training as well. So it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. That is basically the basics of the work groups and the hunt groups, and essentially how call flow works in the ShoreTel system. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, you can type in your questions in the questions box, and we will be able to see those there. And I will wait to see if anything pops up. Currently, I don't have any questions, but I'll wait a few minutes here to see if any pop up, and I will make sure that those get answered for you. So go ahead if you have any. All right, it looks like we do not have any questions. If anything comes up after the webinar is over, we can still certainly help you out. Just let us know, and what you can do is we do have some customer resources that we want to share with you today. If you are a current customer, you probably have this information already, but just to make sure, our email for support is support@inflowcommunications.com. And we also do have a client-facing portal so that you can see your existing tickets and responses there for any issues, which is support.inflowcommunications.com. And then also our number there, which is 855-9-INFLOW or 855-946-3569. And if you have any information on if you need any information rather on Inflow support packages, you can also hit sales@inflowcommunications.com or call 844-446-3569. Let me see here. No questions at present, but want to say thanks for taking the time to put on this presentation. Absolutely. Thank you guys for joining me. I know I can ramble sometimes, but I hope that everything is making sense. And if anything is not, we are here to help. So any clarification, I can absolutely do that for you.